Our next speaker is Kevin Briggs, who is the Chief of Continuity Assessment and Resilience at the National Coordinating Center for Communications within CISA. He leads teams that assess and work to mitigate risks to the communication infrastructures from threats such as EMP, SS7, rogue cell towers, earthquakes, and solar storms. He also oversees several federal continuity communication programs, such as the SHARES program, the Federal Continuity Communications Plan, and the Department and Agency Continuity Network, and the Tidal Globe Assessment Program. I'm butchering your bio here, I apologize. He also leads CISA's 5G capacity building team and several R&D efforts to identify and mitigate mobile cyber threats. And I will.
Okay, well, thank you to S&T for this opportunity to talk about the 5G race and some of the challenges that we have. Let me make sure I've got the clicker under control here. I'm Kevin Briggs, I'm with CISA, and today I'm going to give you some perspectives on the 5G race. And in particular, I'm going to be focusing in on some of the safety and security aspects of 5G. Now, some of you probably back in April saw the press conference with President Trump where he was talking about the 5G race. A couple things I wanted to highlight out of that is that he said it's a race that America must win. And he went a little further and emphasized the security aspects and said secure 5G, those networks are an absolutely vital link in America's prosperity and future national security. So we look at the security aspect as vital. You're amplifying everything under 5G. You're amplifying the speeds, the availability, the every dimension. But if you don't also concurrently handle the security, you're amplifying issues there as well and risk. A couple other things that the president discussed is that he's looking to streamline the deployment of 5G. He's working with the FCC so that the approvals don't take years as they have in the past, but going into the future, it should be done within 90 days, approval or disapproval. And by the end of 2019, the president pointed out that we should have about 92 communities within the United States with 5G services, and that is leading the world. He said the closest next competitor was South Korea. There's a whole lot of other dimensions that could be brought in as to how many people you actually got covered and percentage of population, but those are the measures that are brought out right now. One other thing before leaving that thought is that he wants this to be ubiquitous, and he does talk about the importance of getting it to the edge and into our rural communities. Now, how do we win the 5G race? Is it all about bits and bytes and how fast they move and how far they go? I think the answer is that it's a whole lot more to that than that. And as the president said, our 5G networks must also be secure. They must be strong. And when I say strong, and I think our community, as we look at it, we're talking about where you're available and resilient under all conditions, everywhere. The goal would be everywhere, anytime, any place, and any condition to include all natural disasters and going into all the way up through wartime conditions. That's a big order, and obviously it's always going to be a goal. We believe without good 5G security, we cannot be safe from our enemies. Again, we're amplifying benefits, but we're also amplifying risks if we do not handle all the security aspects. And winning the race, then, what is the answer to that? It means that you're providing the most benefits while ensuring the least risks. Now, I wanted to go through some examples that put some flesh onto these ideas, and I'm going to just go through some of the proposed benefit areas but then kind of flip it and say, okay, if this benefit isn't well secured, what might be some of the consequences? So if you look at autonomous vehicles, a great new capability, but if they are being controlled or monitored or tracked, it opens up all sorts of other vulnerabilities to include crashes and other unwanted consequences. The telemedicine, we're hearing about, hey, you want to bring in the best doctor anywhere in the world into your room and actually using the scalpel to help. Well, again, you don't want that to be cut off mid-operation, and you want to maintain control of the scalpel. National security, each of these areas I won't go through in detail, but I'll just say you need to have the national security information everywhere and to the edge. But if you have a lack of security on your 5G, you have an exfiltration of data in mass at any location, so you have to secure it carefully. First responders, Rob went through that very well. You want to make sure that they get the timely information they need as they're heading into a building or into a situation. On the contrary, you don't want people blocking that or giving you false information and steering them incorrectly. Industrial controls, whether it be smart factories, smart cities, Internet of Things, you've got a whole range of controls that you need to maintain the whole cyber ecosystem around, or there's indeed a great consequence of harm potentially. So last couple things as far as privacy, you want to ensure privacy in all dimensions versus having your voice, video, habits of life, and other dimensions of your life being exposed through networks that connect back into other countries. The bottom line, with good cybersecurity on 5G, we're going to save a lot of lives, save a lot of money, and make America greater in a lot of ways. Without that good security, it is not a pretty picture. So we have to do our jobs here. Now, for the next few slides, I wanted to focus on some of the unique challenges. Rob covered a lot of this already, so I'm going to focus in on some high points as far as policy and in the international scene here. So the U.S. government has serious concerns about allowing any product or vendor into the 5G infrastructure that can be compromised, and has laws that force their companies to cooperate with intelligence organizations and things that would not be in the best interest of the United States. In particular, and you probably, if you're watching the news on these things, there's been a whole lot about the concerns with China and Huawei gear going into networks. We believe those concerns are very valid, and they're not easily mitigated. Given the consequences of a 5G compromise in any of those areas, for example, that I was just describing, those are unacceptable. And while the U.S. has been outwardly discussing more of the Chinese threat here, when you're getting into supply chain and opening up back doors, those that are technologically savvy in other countries can piggyback right onto those. And unfortunately in this situation, I can't go into details, but we have seen a lot of that over the years. You have a very, very large attack surface even today with the 4G networks, 3G, 2G. It's a network based on trust between all countries, and yet you do have cyber controls in there, but they are not anywhere to the degree that we see on the computer side of the equation. So a lot of concerns, and hence we have concerns too about our strategic partners as we share information with them. You know, if it's national security related information, we share it with one of our 5G or other Five Eyes partners or others. We need to make sure that that's not going to then go out into the wild. Some other unique aspects, and Rob did touch on the complexities of the software-defined networks. The operators are going to lose some of the visibility that they have into all the dynamics of making this network adapt in real time to whatever the situation is. In addition, if you have hardware, firmware, software that is not trusted, then you've got more routes of exfiltration and compromise than you have resources to mitigate. I can guarantee you if a piece of equipment is built in a country and in a place that's untrusted, the numbers of ways that they can make that device, in a sense, compromised, go beyond the dollars that we have to try to vet all of that. You can mitigate it, but you can't eliminate that threat. There was an excellent report by the Huawei Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, their oversight board, and they talked about you can bring in technical mitigations, even if you do bring in Huawei gear or other things like ZTE equipment. But for national security and where you have life and safety on the line, that's just something that we cannot say, oh, that's guaranteed, that's good enough. A few last thoughts is, and I'm going to talk about some backdoor issues and some specifics to put a little more meat onto the bone here in a minute. But we don't see that they're going to have a smoking backdoor where it's obvious, they've labeled it in a way that it looks and says backdoor. But if you have, and I like the term bug door, if you have poor security practice just being baked into every element of your hardware, firmware, software, then you have plausible deniability, and yet you still have full access to everything. So that is a huge concern, and we know, again, that the Russians and others are largely aware of where these vulnerabilities and access points are, and unfortunately they do use those against us. Now, as far as what is CISA doing, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, we've got several initiatives ongoing right now. One of them is on the government side. We have the Federal Acquisition Security Council. We also, on a joint industry and government perspective, we have like the ICT, the Information and Communications Technology Task Force. So we're working in partnership across government and with our industry partners and others that are in the community. Just within CISA, we've got the National Risk Management Center that's been stood up here not too long ago, and they are doing a broad-based 5G risk assessment. Hopefully that'll be out a little later this year. And we're tapping into other expertise centers throughout government, like the Idaho National Labs as a test lab. And we appreciate very much the partnership with S&T and with our other partners in government. S&T has been very good about working with us to say we've got a problem. Let's develop some pilots to look at how do we address these in a cost-effective way. I wanted to just point out one study. There's many, many studies on these things, but it's a recent one. I'm not saying that the department endorses every aspect of this or whatever, but I use it as an illustration of why we're concerned. Some people think, oh, why are you picking on Huawei, or why are you picking on ZTE or the like? And here's some of what we can talk about in a public setting that would give us concern. I also point out at the bottom of the slide, here's the source. It's a finite state assessment. That's a company that's done an assessment that was published last month. Huawei has put out a rebuttal, and so I invite you to read both sides of the thing. But I do believe there's a lot of information in there that's useful. One is that almost 10,000 of the firmware images that they surveyed that was in the Huawei equipment. This is over 500 pieces of different Huawei gear, had a lot of issues. In this case, roughly 55% of those firmware images had at least one potential backdoor associated. I think, and I'm not going to go through every line here, but notice that it's almost 30% had things like one default username and password stored in the firmware. That's just like a key to your, house thing. You don't do that. And I'm not saying it's all with intent, but if you are not instituting good software engineering, principles and practices, this is what happens. You take something off a low-cost, source and stick it into your code, and there you go. Now, Huawei devices have a high number of security vulnerabilities, at least according to this study. On average, Huawei devices had, and let me go one more. Due to time, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I gave you some other things in your spare time you can look at if you're interested. On average, Huawei devices had over 100 known vulnerabilities inside their firmware. Now, that's per device. That's just incredible in a way. The Huawei engineers systematically made poor decisions, at least in our opinion, with regard to security. I'll only point out maybe a couple more here. Sometimes they used 10-year-old versions of libraries and the like. When there are known vulnerabilities associated with those, they didn't take the time to clean them up or use the more current, patched, improved software. And in some cases, they actually saw that they had like a call with a function that was vulnerable. They know that there is a newer one that's better. They renamed in the software that it was the newer one, but in actuality, the back end is the old one. So if you're doing IV&V, independent verification and validation on the thing, and you're looking through it, looks good, oh yeah, that's the latest. That's why we need tools that go through carefully and say, wait a second, this is not lining up. It says it's this, but it's actually the old one that's very vulnerable. So those are a few examples of why we're concerned with using Huawei or other gear in our sensitive areas. I hope that helps a bit. I want to go into a couple other things outside of the standard security area and into more of the safety area. And I just want to highlight that we've got a whole lot more in the way of 5G spectrum being put out there. 5 gigahertz worth, it's just, it's a lot of spectrum going out there. So with that, in particular, like the 24 gigahertz spectrum that's been put out there, even just very recently, there are concerns. Other parts of government have said, wait, if we take that and you don't appropriately design your networks, if you don't have somebody like Rob Dews helping you design it end-to-end, then you're going to interfere with other government functions, like NOAA's ability to use the weather prediction off of their satellites. And some have gone so far as to say, oh, you're going to push back our ability to predict hurricanes by, like what we did back in the 80s. So we need to move forward intelligently. Nobody's arguing that we need to move forward into the 5G race, but we need to do these things with not just rushing headlong into things without carefully considering the consequences. One other thing on this slide. The spectrum here is very vast, and a lot of it's new territory for us. The human experiment of 3G, 2G, 4G, we're going to see the same thing with 5G. It's going to be into new areas where we haven't had ubiquitous 24, 28 gigahertz all the way up to 90 gigahertz. And cellular heating and things like that, some of the SAR criteria that the FCC currently uses, we may need to evolve that, and that's where we need help as well. Because, okay, I'm going to speed up a little here. I've got about a minute. I'll touch on a couple things. As Rob pointed out, there's likely to be a whole lot more points of presence as far as in your neighborhoods and on buildings. The coverage of a low frequency versus high frequency is pretty dramatic. And so you may have millions of more points of a 5G, versus having something that's a mile away on a cell tower. Now it's right in your home. And what's it going to be doing? The health effects, I wish we had a little more time. I'll just say the next couple slides give some studies. In the past, like the 2011 World Health Organization, people said, oh, it's just, a lot of poor rats in this case and other rodents being exposed on a very high level. But when you go down to, like at the bottom of the slide, the Ramazzini, or however you pronounce that, Institute study, that was at a much lower level. And we were seeing the same types of brain, heart, tumors, other things. And now there is a move afoot by many well-respected scientists across the world saying we need to be careful here. We could have a real health problem. The references are there for you. There are calls with many that said we need to reclassify this into a Category 1. So last takeaway is that the challenges I've gone through here are many with 5G. The benefits are great, but we need to go forward intelligently. And so we're asking for everyone's help. This is a whole of community effort. We can't, government doesn't have the solutions. We can help facilitate, but the solutions are out there. So with that, I'll close. And if you have any questions, I can entertain those now. Yes. Hey, Bill. If we can wait for the mic. You're about to get a mic.
So, Kevin, a question about the relationship between 5G and the global submarine cable system that carries 99% of intercontinental communications. So, I recently talked to the publisher of Subtel Forum, who's up to date on the statistics. There are between 700 and 800 landing sites for these commercial intercontinental systems. And if there were not even a purposeful, like EMP attack, if the North Koreans just did a test over the Pacific Ocean to see what EMP effects there are, there is no financial incentive less in place now to protect the commercial, not the national security systems, but the commercial systems. And so that could have a huge impact on availability of 5G for international supply chains and business. Is that of concern, the intersection between 5G and these submarine cable systems that are pretty well protected from solar storms, but wouldn't necessarily make it for high altitude EMP?
Well, there's a lot of waterfront in that question, no pun intended. But yes, we are very concerned about all dimensions of 5G. 5G takes you into, I think there's 12,000 satellites planned over the next few years that will also be tied in. It's whether it's in a sense the access point for a lot of information that then goes under the undersea cables. I will point out, you mentioned EMP, that's one of my favorite subjects. When it comes to public safety, there is a new standard that has come out for public safety that allows for, this is an APCO standard that came out about 2 weeks ago, that says that EMP is a consideration now and how to do it. So yes, we are concerned that the 5G access, as well as core, and things like FirstNet and others may someday be protected against these things. But yeah, it all interconnects, whether it be an undersea cable or a satellite or a 5G RAN node. Yeah, I hope that helped answer your question. Yeah.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. You mentioned a lot about supply chain attacks in terms of resilience and cyber resilience for 5G. Are you also working on the deployment, operation? A lot of the attacks don't necessarily use third-party vulnerabilities, but actually just operate within the environment to get their goals without vulnerabilities in the equipment itself. How are you looking at it from a more global operational perspective?
And I'm not sure I fully understood that question. Are you saying that the avenues for...
I'll give an example.
Okay.
My company is a cybersecurity company. A month ago, we published a Chinese operation against a big telco provider, different country. But they were like 12 countries they were operating. They walked in through a completely unrelated system on the web front, walked inside the environment till they got to the core and had complete control of the core when they could do everything they wanted in that operation. So even though no vulnerability in the LTE core of the case was used, the Chinese operator of this environment had complete control of their environment. They were using that for individual tracking, for tracking people's whereabouts and calls records, but they could easily do it for any other kind of manipulation. It's a much more holistic problem than just do we bring in third-party vulnerable assets to the game.
Absolutely. No, I would concur that it's a much more complex equation. And because it's backward, 5G is backward compatible with all the other vulnerable aspects of 4G, 3G, 2G. It's well known that there's lots of tools and techniques to use that. And the backdoors on the databases that are in all of the comm networks is another huge issue. I want to point out one quick thing. It jogged my brain here. The biggest subscriber-shipped network in the world isn't the internet. The biggest one is the comm networks, the SS7 networks, the diameter. When you add up all the subscribers there, we got them beat by billions. And we need to bring in the same cyber controls end to end, whether it be in the core network or at the managed databases and other points. Yes. Okay, I'm getting that may be the last question. Oh, one more. Okay, one more question.
So we're talking about security and heterogeneous networks. Currently, the carriers can't even protect all the phone calls that are coming through. This is only going to compound the matter and then also introduce the current vulnerabilities that the internet poses. So I see the security risk going tremendously, exponentially greater without changing the actual infrastructure platform integrity itself, which we haven't done since 1978. So just as far as security goes, how do you expect that we're going to be able to handle it?
Well, again, a very large question, but I'll say there are practices that are commonly used in the IT computer world that need to be brought more into the bigger data network as far as subscribers, things like SS7 diameter, where you're not monitoring people's voice and data and whatever, but you are looking at the controls, whether it be at a signaling transfer point or at your international gateways or in your rural interconnects. There needs to be the same discipline and security controls of monitoring appropriately, not where you're getting into people's privacy. But we need to bring in that same level of expertise that the community does have into all of our telecom things. But yeah, if we don't up our game there, yeah, we introduce huge vulnerability. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.